What is design thinking? In this snippet from one of our live events, UX designer Cameron talks you through everything you need to know about design thinking, covering why it's important for the industry and how it can help you as a designer. Visit our events page for more events like this. You'll find the link in the description. If you have any questions about UX design or design thinking process, post them in the comments. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Now, let's dive straight in.
So design thinking is both an ideology and a process. It's all about solving complex issues in a user-centric way. So design thinking was created as a way of taking the process and approaches of designers and using them to solve problems that designers don't typically encounter. So it's the mindset of a designer applied to these problems. And what you'll often find is the problems are defined as wicked problems. And so what a wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. So that's a really big difference that you have to focus on, is what types of problems that design thinking focuses on. And I'll explain what a wicked problem is. I feel like that's not a good breakdown, but it's a good definition. So the difference between these problems is, let's take a complex problem, for instance. So this would be like playing chess. And what you have to do in chess is take the other person's king and defend your own. And it's pretty straightforward game with pretty straightforward rules. But a wicked problem, let's say, is how to properly educate a child. So you have to now think, well, what does it mean to educate a child properly? What does that look like? What is the end result? Will it work for all children? From subject to subject. So physical science versus social studies, and testing in different environments. So there's so many other factors. And even if you solve one, another problem occurs. So that's the difference between a regular problem or even just a complex problem or a wicked problem. So the next thing I want to talk about is this quote from Linda Nyman, the CEO of Creativity at Work. She has a great quote, and it says, "Design thinking draws on logic, imagination, intuition, and systemic reasoning to explore the possibilities of what could be and to create desired outcomes that benefit the end user." And so design mindset is not problem-focused, it's solution-focused and action-oriented. So it involves both analysis and imagination. And I really thought that was a good quote. But what you want to take from it is the types of problems. So the designer's mindset applied to these wicked problems. So the next thing we'll be getting into is the phases of design thinking, the process. And if you Google design thinking, this is typically what you'll find, the image of these hexagons lined up. And the process is typically divided into 5 phases: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So even though it looks like a straight line, you have to understand that it's not a linear process. So after each phase, you'll need to redefine and reassess your previous goals and assumptions. So you have to go back. And there's also a lot of complexity in each phase, as well as a lot of overlap. So I'll try not to go too deep, just give you the basic, just general understanding of each phase and how it works. So phase number 1, the empathize phase. So this is spent getting to know your user and the problems they face. So you observe them and engage with them to understand them on an emotional and psychological level. And so let's say you don't know your user, you're not aware of the industry. What you would do is called preliminary or preparatory research. And this is pretty much just taking the time to get to know the industry, get to know competitors, similar products, comparable experiences, or other services that are in that industry. And it's very important to note this. I cannot stress this enough. Only through proper research can we know what the user's thinking and feeling. All things beyond that, beyond proper research, are just guesses, assumptions, or pretty much arrogance. You want to leave those out of your process. I'm telling you, this is very important. Proper research. So the tools for this phase, for the empathize phase, these are just a few. There are several, but you can do group interviews. You can do as-is scenarios. And this is IBM's tool. So what you do is you map out what the user is currently experiencing, like step by step. Mind mapping, where you take a general concept and you trace the terms out. and connect them. Empathy mapping, where you figure out what the user is thinking, feeling, and doing. And you have the user in the center. It's like a quadrant. You have seen empathy maps before. So one thing that I constantly encountered, and most of the time I was working with startups, is just skipping the empathize phase, just feeling like it's not necessary. So half of my job was convincing the CEO of the importance of research. And sometimes you can get valid insights from the CEO and interviewing them, but it's always best to go straight to the source and remind them that they are not the user. The next thing is just having too many assumptions and assuming that you know what they're thinking. It's very helpful to remember not to judge what you observe, but to ask questions, question everything. So even if you find an insight, ask the user why, and continue to ask why, and validate your observation through their own understanding and not your assumption of what it is that you think you're seeing. So the next thing is phase number 2. So define. And this is where you take all of the insights from the empathize phase and you start to put them together and get a sense of what the problem is and the needs of the user. And so pretty much it's just a synthesis of the data, and the end result is a problem statement. Okay. And so you're going to look for patterns, themes, relationships between the information. And if you're familiar with the UX process, it's comparable to analysis, the analysis phase. Tools for this particular phase are storyboarding, where you map out, you draw, it's pretty much a visual of what your user is experiencing. You can do personas, where you take your insights from the entire group of users and you kind of boil them down to persona. You have prioritization matrices, where it's you have a quadrant of 4 and you start to group the problems and you pretty much base them off of like precedence, which one is more important than the next. And then big idea vignettes, where you have one idea and you kind of work backwards. So what would the solution look like? So if you already had the solution, what would the user's end result be and how would they feel? And that's where it's like working backwards. That's a really good tool. And so the obstacles of this phase. So having too broad or too narrow of a focus. And so if it's too narrow, you miss out on opportunities. And if it's too broad, your problem becomes too convoluted. And so the next obstacle is just not framing your problem statement in a user-centric way. So phase number 3. And so at this point, it's time to get creative. So this is where you begin to generate the ideas for that innovative solution. And remember that no idea is a bad idea. So this particular phase is split in 2, but most of the time you'll see that it's not, they have it lumped together. But I believe there's a difference between creating an idea and deciding on an idea. In a group setting, it's a bit difficult because, you know, when you're by yourself, you can pick whatever it is that you like, but the skill for deciding on an idea in a group setting is definitely something I think is important to separate and distinguish. The questions you want to ask is what will wow them? What outside of what's realistic will wow them? And also take into consideration the data that you have. So the question you can ask is, with all the data I've gathered, what solution could solve one or more of the user's problems? And then you can kind of pinpoint ways to combine problems later. You want to focus on one at a time. Definitely focus on one at a time. And the next in ideate, tools for ideation, the ideation process are time boxing, where you split up your group and everyone goes their separate ways and takes like a minute and they come back. And then you have brainstorming, sketching. So just having a visual of what it is, the idea, it kind of helps to draw it out instead of just have it written, and dot voting. So this is once you've narrowed down, once you've narrowed down your solution, you can vote. So if you're in a group and everyone is given 3 dots, you have 10 ideas. And so everyone would put a dot on the idea that they think should move to the next phase. And at the end, whichever has the most dots is the one that moves on. So it kind of alleviates that the issue of one person thinking that this is more important than the next and the group coming together and deciding. So the pitfalls or obstacles to avoid is just simply not thinking outside the box, not really digging deep for those innovative ideas, and throwing out too many. And so the next thing is not deferring judgment. And like I said, with brainstorming and having that environment where you facilitate the comfort, the safe space to generate ideas, and encouraging the wild ones and not thinking hyper realistically. All right, so phase number 4, prototype. So this is where you turn your idea into a tangible product, a rough model, or a sketch. And prototypes are pretty much a scaled down version of your product, and the way that your user will respond to it will depend on whether it's going to be rejected, reconstructed, or accepted. And let me say that prototypes should not take much time to make. The goal of a prototype is not to have a working model, but to give form to an idea. Some designers or some design thinkers believe that the first iteration in your process is not valid until you get to a prototype. So until you have a working or a model where your user can interact with it, it's not valid. And I don't agree with this, but I understand why there's this belief. I believe that any time spent with the user is valuable, but it's extremely important, the information you get when you see the user do something you didn't expect, or even break something. It's just that information it carries so much more weight than, well, for me at least, taking that time to see them interact with your product. And also another thing is on multifunctional teams, prototypes can sometimes be misinterpreted or misunderstood. So like what an MBA and what an engineer and marketers believe are prototypes are different than what designers believe. So it's good when you are working in a group with different people is to go ahead and clear that expectation of what the prototype is supposed to do. So like I said, giving form to an idea. And questions to ask during this phase are, what features does the prototype need to communicate to the customer? And what can be removed? So not having too much complexity and making sure that you focus in on what it is that you need to test with this prototype. First, I'm going to start with the tools that you need in the prototyping, or you can use in the prototyping phase. So pencil and paper, simple. If you're going for like a digital platform, Figma's good. Go Mockingbird is good. It's another platform for wires. 3D modeling software is also good. And just anything you have available is also good. So let's go over the obstacles of this phase. Like I said, adding too much complexity to a prototype and not honing in on what it is that you're actually testing for, and spending too much time or too much money on a prototype. It's supposed to be a quick process. All right, and now we're down to the last phase number 5. This is test. So it's pretty much just exactly as it sounds. You test your solution, you invite your user to respond and interact with your prototype, and this will inform you to whether you need to kill your idea or move forward. And you don't want to, if you need to kill your idea, you don't want to have to invest additional resources. And we'll talk more about that in the pitfalls. But the questions you want to be asking during this phase is the solution useful? Is it usable? Is it desirable, efficient, and effective? And how does the user feel about your idea? And what feedback do you have? And listening to that feedback. I can't stress that enough. All right, so tools for testing. You can do usertesting.com, Hotjar, or just maintaining that access to the person that you're designing for at all times. So the obstacles that I have is listening to the action of what the user is saying to you during this testing phase. Another big thing is also I found with startups that the lack of funding sometimes can be an issue, because if you don't have the time to go back and iterate on what it is that you need to, you'll want to push your product forward regardless of whether or not the tests reveal that maybe there's not a market for it, or maybe the idea that you chose to go forward with is just not right? For your user, it's just not being able to go back and start from scratch or start from a earlier phase. So that's one of the pitfalls I found.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about design thinking, let us know in the comments. If you want to learn more about UX and UI, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to find out if UX and UI are for you, we have free short courses covering both of these areas. And the links for those are in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.